You are listening to Our Urban Voices with Dr. Alphonse Javed, a podcast that presents Christian narratives through diverse voices that impact urban ministry. Here is your host.
In this podcast, we cover everything from churches and church planting efforts, mission and missions organization evangelism, and unreached people groups, emerging movements and initiatives, justice, current events related to faith, and the persecuted church too, author interviews, and more. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome back to our Urban Voices. I'm your host, Dr. Alphonse Javed. Today, I'm joined by Peter Lwin, youth and associate pastor of Calvary Burmese Church in Washington, D.C. Our topic today focuses on the challenges of pastoring an ethnic church in the U.S., especially during a period of military conflict in his home country, back in Myanmar. Before we jump in a little bit about Peter, like I said, he has been the youth pastor at Calvary Burmese Church for the last 10 years and is now also the associate pastor there. Peter was born and raised in Myanmar, coming to the U.S. when he was 11. And he will talk more about that. His wife, Michelle, and his two sons join him in ministry. Thanks for joining us today, Peter. How you doing?
I am good. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Javed. It is truly an honor. This is something that has been on my mind, especially with Myanmar, my home country. So I'm glad we are getting a chance to talk about it and hopefully get the word out for more prayers needed for my home country.
So, Peter, for any listener who aren't familiar with Myanmar, can you tell us a little bit about Myanmar, where it is, how many Christians live there, and the current political situation there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Myanmar is in Southeast Asia. If you just imagine where India is, where China is, where Thailand is, we are sandwiched right between those three countries. So east of India, south of China, and west of Thailand. Small country, probably not even as big as Texas. So you can just kind of imagine the magnitude and the size of the country and how big Texas is for obvious reasons. But as of current, there are about 54 million people who live in Myanmar. Wow. Myanmar is a very, very strong Buddhist country. 88% of the population are Buddhists, and only about 6.2% are Christians, and the rest are Muslims. But as you know, you can kind of just imagine there's very, very few Christians and a great field for ministry and a great magnitude of people who are still reachable, who are still lost, who there is just so much to be done for. So that is Myanmar and the current population. As for the political situation, as many of your listeners may or may not know, February 1st of 2021, that's when the people elected Democratic government was supposed to take over. That was supposed to be their day, and the country was hopeful. The people in Myanmar were very, very hopeful for a better future, because for the past, I want to say about a decade or so, Myanmar had been continuously growing from infrastructure to the economy to everything else. And just to have all of that hope taken away from the people of Myanmar for the new generation of youth and young individuals, it was as much as a shock as it was on February 1st of 2021 when the military staged a coup. It was a sad day for everyone in the country. And I say everyone because there is, the elite, the military families are so few in comparison to the 54 million people that I just mentioned earlier. And so till this day, the coup has not relinquished or released their power yet. They made up some things about the leaders, and most of your listeners may have heard of the name Aung San Suu Kyi, who is really the advocate, the person who represents democracy in the country, and all of our hopes were on her and her party, and to have all of that taken away literally overnight, I think it's just been unfair. I think everyone feels that sentiment, and everyone even feels anger towards the military and the generals and all the leaders who took over without reasons that we can ever imagine. Most of it is just greed and power. So that's the political climate situation.
Yeah. When you say Christians, 6% Christians, I do want to talk more about the reaction of your congregation to this recent coup. But before that, I just want to go back. You said 6% Christians. So when you say 6% Christians, I understand because I'm from Pakistan, and when we say Christians, that also means just the term Christian. So when you say Christians, do you have an idea how many of them are really, you know, uh, born again believers? Let's say born again.
I think you're right. Of the 6.6%, that's just like a general, like everyone gets lump summed into any Christian, I guess, denomination really gets lumped into there.
Mhm.
As far as like the serious born again Christians who are not just Christians because their parents were, or who are not Christians because they were forced to by, I don't know, their family.
Right.
I don't know the exact number, but I would say out of the 6%, maybe few at best, because there are a lot of individuals, even in my families too, even with people I know, with the churches that I attended when I was younger. It's a Christian church that I grew up in the Baptist church. But when it comes to I would say like doctrine, it's not all 100% spirit led, if that makes sense.
So let me ask you the real question that I wanted to ask you was what has the reaction of your congregation been to the recent coup, especially of the young people, because you work with them?
Yeah, absolutely. On February 1st, when we found out, so it's February 1st in Myanmar in the morning, but we found out in the United States, it's January 31st at nighttime. That's when everything was going on. So as soon as we found out, posts started appearing on social media. Families were calling each other to make sure that they were okay because of the possible protests and the possible reaction from the military that could break out. So when we first heard it, it was just total unbelief. The whole country was ready for a new democratic government, and so the families here, out here, and not just in the United States, but outside in other countries as well, everyone was in disbelief. And the first reaction to any kind of thing like this is, why God, right? Why God? Why are you allowing this to happen? Mm-hmm. We know you are in control of everything. Nothing happens without you allowing so. And why, God, are you allowing this? And that's for me personally too, that's the first reaction that came up. Why, God? Why now? In this 21st century, there are still military coups being staged, and it's just like the movies. Right. So the congregation's first reaction was just that. Why? But then I think as a congregation and as families started to, let the reality of the situation sink in, the next reaction that we had was, okay, what can we do now? What can we physically do as a congregation, as a family who are outside of the country? We are only getting news and snippets from families about details of what's going on. And so the congregation's reaction, secondly, was to start praying. We had lots of prayer groups. This is, mind you, this is also in the middle of a global pandemic. And so we couldn't gather as a church family to even go to the church and pray together. We started hosting a lot of Zoom meetings, Zoom prayers, fast and prayers. Even for within our youth groups, we started doing chain prayers. We started doing everything that we could possibly do as a first reaction. That's the only thing that we knew how to do, was start praying. And thirdly, the third reaction was, okay, now that we are here, we're not here by accident. God didn't put us here. God didn't allow our parents, families to immigrate to a different country just to live our life however we want here, just to enjoy the benefits of a democratic government and the lifestyle that we have. God placed us here for a reason. What can we do? What is God telling us to do? And we went back to Scripture, straight back to Scripture. And pretty much we're supposed to take care of those in need. We're supposed to speak up for those who can't. We're supposed to, feed the hungry. We're supposed to take care of the poor. And so with that mindset and mentality, the church then turned into kind of like a third stage reaction, if you will, where we started to partner with not just Christian organizations, every other organizations. So our church is based in DC. And so around DC, we have a lot of Burmese community presence, not just Christians, but Buddhists and other religions alike. And so we started uniting together, all in the name of peace. And we started rallying, going into DC to do protests, to seek out help from the government, to raise funds as much as we can, because of all of the movements that were also happening at the same time in Myanmar, such as CDM and PDF, and you can Google those terms when you get a chance. But in all those movements that were happening, and how can we help as a church? How can we be the hands and feet of Jesus as we are called to be as a church and as a body of the church? How can we do exactly that? So that was our third reaction, which is still continuing till this day. We are still doing a lot. There's still a lot to be done. There's still a lot of people in Myanmar who were displaced from their homes, who had to give up their life to run, pretty much run. And some have gone to other countries' borders to seek refuge. Some have left families behind. And it's just, within our church, we have a couple individuals who had to leave their families behind just because they had some role in the political realm, and they had to run. They had to leave their family behind, and now we have families separated. So, as a church, how do we just be the hands and feet of Jesus? How do we do the best we can with what's been given to us, the opportunities that's been given to us, and how do we be good stewards of all of God, all of the blessings really that God has given to us. So that's and
just, man, if nothing else, I know that the Lord is He's gracious when it comes to prayer. Absolutely. I think that's the right attitude. Sometimes we we try to do more without praying more. So I think that's good thing. And then just helping, whether it's second generation or third generation, just helping them to know that they can do more for their fellow brothers and sisters back home. That's awesome. I think we did not talk about this, but you are actually the first youth pastor we have had on the show. What's one of the biggest challenges youth pastors? I'm just stepping away from our topic. I just want to hear about this too. So what's one of the biggest challenges youth pastors are facing right now, and how have you addressed that? And I know that's a vague question. There's a lot of things going on. I just wanted to know, as a youth pastor, what are those challenges, so our audience can hear that too.
Yeah. So I'll speak from, I guess, a standpoint of an immigrant church, because our church, the first generation of church members were all born, raised in Burma, and they grew up in Burma, and they migrated here, and collectively as people from Myanmar who speak the same language started a church, and even second generation, I would say. So now we're into like a third generation now, where their kids born and raised here in America, or they were brought, like myself, when we were young. So I came to the States when I was 11, and I'm, in my mid-30s now. So from that standpoint of things, especially as immigrant churches, language is always the barrier for us. Language is always the thing that always comes in between, it seems like. And not just our church, but I speak to a lot of the other Myanmar churches, Burmese congregations across the States. And, we hear the same sentiment of, how do we be effective in ministering to the young? Because most of them don't speak their mother's language anymore. They don't speak the native tongue anymore. They grew up here. They started in, kindergarten, elementary, middle school here. And so they don't speak the language. And so how do we, one of the biggest challenge that we had was, how do we get them into the church? And that is just a challenge that we've had over the past, I would say, 5-10 years, because when I was a youth in the church, most of us still spoke Burmese or Myanmar, and most of us spoke well enough Myanmar that we are able to communicate freely. And a lot of the youth at that time, and we call ourselves youth, but most of my peers, my older peers, were in their late 20s, 30s, some even 40s, and they're still coming to youth because they just felt young. And so, we were able to speak freely in Myanmar, and that was fine. But now that, I grew into the leadership role and youth pastor role, the challenge was certainly there to how do we bring them in, and how do we get them to stay in, right? Bringing them in is fine. We tell the parents, bring your kids to church. Yes, the parents can force their children to come into church, but just because they come to church doesn't mean that they are necessarily being fed properly in the spiritual sense, because of language barrier. Most of our church services, all of our church services before, were all in Myanmar. And so, kids are just either staying there, or they're running around in the back, or they go into Sunday school. Over the past decade or so, we started converting our Sunday school programs to have English speaking teachers, right? They're still from Myanmar, but they've been in the country for a long time, and they speak English. So, at least in Sunday school, we're able to do that. But as in the worship experience, in the actual main service, how do we get them in? And so that's been a challenge, I think, for almost all immigrant churches. And that challenge is sometimes so great that youth, especially who grew up here, and they don't want to come to church anymore because they're not getting anything.
Right.
And so one, they'll either just stop coming when they hit teenage years and their parents can't force them anymore.
Right.
Or two, they'll go somewhere else. And if they go somewhere else, great, right? If they are attending a church that is ministering to their spiritual maturity, great. But if they're going somewhere else, and they're just, not, nothing is, their life is not being impacted or affected in a positive way, then that's I consider that as a loss. So, from a standpoint of that, as an immigrant church, the biggest problem that we have is
how to integrate those people.
Yeah, the language barrier, and how we have addressed it. So I think that's the second question. So I think God has a way of inserting or interjecting certain people at certain times. That's especially true in our church. I came to the States when I was 11. I can speak Myanmar fluently, although I don't know like all of the advanced vocabulary. I can still carry a conversation. And because I came here when I was 11, I went through I started middle school here. And so I was able to pick up English much, I guess, faster than my older brother did. And so because I went to school here, now I'm bilingual. And I believe that God, when he called me initially, I ran just like almost any youth pastor story. We never want to do it. We say no to God. But eventually I just surrendered to my calling. And being at this role, I think really helped our church, because we had a lot of the older generation of youth, again, late 20s, 30s, 40s, who were, outgoing. They're not attending the youth programs anymore. They're not leading youths anymore. Mm-hmm. And God just put me in that place at that time. And it's all spiritually led. There's no word to explain. There's no phrase or story to explain how everything just fell into place, but the Spirit, God Amen. Did it. And so, and then, I surrendered to my calling, and I slowly started to minister to the younger generation. So the third generation, the kids who were born and raised here. And when I started as a youth pastor, the group that I was ministering to, they were just entering teenage years. And I've been with them for 10 years. So, you can just kind of imagine the amount of time I've had with them to minister to them and to really, I think, bridge that gap, right? If God didn't interject me in this place, I'm sure he would have used someone else, but that it allowed the gap between the older first and second generations who immigrated to the States and the third generation who were born, allowed us to really bridge that gap. Because one of the things that I always got when I went into teaching the youth is my parents, they don't get me. Our parents don't get us. That was like the common theme that we always talked about. And, speaking of, that's another challenge too, is you have these youths who grew up here, who are used to the culture here, who are used to the traditions and the mindsets from here. And then you have their parents who grew up in another country, and, what they're bringing here, it's just totally different. So I was able to address those with the youths. I was able to address them in our conversations, in our biblical teachings, in our deep discussions that we have with them. And I think over the years, they started getting it. I think they started just accepting that, hey, you're born here, but your bloodline and your parents, great grandparents are from a totally different country. So you're always going to have that mix of, different flavors, if you will. And, you can't expect your parents to be like your parents at your school from your peers, because they're just different. And you just have to work around the differences and be able to come together. And so that's just how we've addressed it.
So you've been bridging the gap, right? And
yes,
connecting the older generation with the younger. But so though your primary job is the young people, but still that's also beneficial for the older folks too, because now they can see, okay, yeah, he is able to communicate what we're trying to communicate in their language, so they can hear very clearly. Just youth in general, younger people generally think differently. Every young generation thinks that they are smarter than the older generation and they have figured out. So that's just that's true with every ethnic group. All kind of people have the same problem. But then the second layer is the cultural, the linguistic layer of Myanmar community. So are there any commonly held beliefs about youth pastors you like to dispel now?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that I think my youth, not just my youth, but other youth as well, because we do a lot of fellowships with other churches, is that a youth pastor just has to be cool and hip.
So he doesn't have to be? That's what you're trying to tell me?
Has to be cool and hip. So yes, he doesn't have to be cool and hip. Exactly right. And, like earlier in my ministry, and, this is just me being vulnerable with you, is earlier in my ministry, I did play the comparison game with myself to other youth pastors. I'm like, man, that youth pastor is so cool. He's doing everything right, or she's doing everything right.
Well, that's why you got the 3 guitars over there. I wish if I was able to play one, and you got 3 on the back.
There you go. And yeah, and so I did that comparison game, and I think it's just a misconception of, like, okay, you're a youth pastor, you have youth, and the other one is a youth pastor has to be young. Not really. I know other successful youth pastors who are like old parents and they have kids who are teenagers, and they are very effective in their youth ministry. They're probably more effective because they know how to handle teenagers. So, it's just those kind of beliefs that a youth pastor just has to be, I guess, quote unquote, in with the cultural of just, being you have to have a cool image and, talk like the youth talk, and, just those misconceptions. And you think that only then the youth are going to listen to you. Not necessarily. I think a different side to that is, I think a youth pastor just has to be caring. A youth pastor just has to live, not just talk the talk, but also walk the walk, right?
So, yes, I agree with that too, 100%. I'm with you. And I think that's also true with any pastor. So are there any commonly held beliefs about ethnic churches you disagree with? Because you are pastoring an ethnic church.
Yeah. And this is, not even from like outside looking in. So this is beliefs that there currently exist within our Myanmar churches and communities as well, is that if a church does not worship in English, we think that church is backwards.
Wow.
Because here's what it is. if they think that there is no, like, at least English speaking youth pastor or some kind of English speaking service, that their church is, there's a saying in Myanmar, the best definition or the best translation for that is, you're like a villager. you're not hip, you're not modern, you're like,
back,
you have a villager mindset, something like that. And it's just some churches, because like, they can do it, they do it great, but some churches, the pastor is ministering to literally folks who just lost their home in Myanmar, and they went to Thailand and to be refugees, and they applied for status, a refugee status, and they get here, and pastors are trying to minister to those folks who don't even speak Myanmar. They speak just their very, like, simple ethnic language. And so, it's just, the misconception is that, that church is very, that old,
backward,
thinking backward. And because they don't have any of these, like, modern, contemporary style of worship, we think that it's just a very backwards church, which I certainly disagree with, because God wants to move how he wants to move.
Amen.
And some churches are blessed with all this technology, but lack spirituality. Some churches are blessed with spirituality, lacking technology.
Right.
It's that it goes back to that verse is, the first will be last, the last will be first, kind of mentality, kind of thinking. So it's just, I think, especially in our ethnic churches, especially for those pastors who are really, really serving the call and going to those areas where there's a large amount of just incoming refugees, and then ministering to those. I think those pastors are coolest pastors.
Wow. So a lot of refugees are coming to the United States from Myanmar.
So not like right now because of the military coup, but over the years. And the military coup started last year, but even before there were a lot of civil wars going on in Myanmar. And there are a lot of ethnic groups who were internally displaced, IDPs, as we call them, internally displaced people. And a lot of them were displaced from their homes because of the military's greed, or greed and power, and just overarching into the land of the people, because they want to take over the land for something. I don't know exactly, whether probably natural resources or whatever. And so they would just take over, and then these ethnic groups lose their homes, their families, even sometimes. And some of them have no choice but to, because we border Thailand, and Thailand takes a lot of the Myanmar refugees in. A lot of them go there, and then some go to the west, to India as well, and apply for refugee status in other countries. So other countries include U.S. takes in a lot of those refugees, and I forget exactly the year. There was a lot of influx of refugees coming in, and the United States was taking them in. God bless USA. And so there were a lot of areas. I think Buffalo, New York, definitely took in a lot of those refugees. And then down south as well, I forget exactly the city, state, but they also took in a lot of refugees. So, for Myanmar pastors around those areas, they were probably overjoyed with that. A lot of members coming in, but of course, that also comes with its own challenges as well. Yeah.
So as we get close to wrapping this up, what is something you would like Christians to know, Christians here and around the world, whoever is listening to this podcast, to know and understand about Myanmar? I know you have already said so much and you have explained a lot of things. Is there something else you want to share?
Yeah. Well, first off, man, Myanmar is a beautiful country. I only stayed there for 11 years, and I go back every chance I get, but it's a beautiful country filled with God's creations. And that also includes the people he created. And as we told you earlier, I mean, 88% of Myanmar is still a missionary field. 88% of people in Myanmar are still needing, to hear the gospel. We have a lot of Myanmar evangelists, doing what God has called them to do. But as those of us who are outside, I would really like to ask for your prayers. And if you would, take up the missionary field, if you want to choose where you want to go, I'm praying God shows you Myanmar, because the people of Myanmar, I'm sure you guys have seen documentaries. And we were talking earlier, Dr. Javed, of Anthony Bourdain's documentary. And, from the documentary, pretty much everyone who goes there, one thing that they always note and say is the people of Myanmar are very humble.
Wow.
And that they are. And they are so very, very humble, and shows humility. And it's baked into the Myanmar cultural tradition, but they're very humble. And they need, and this is my prayer too for Myanmar, is, man, they need to just hear the gospel. They need to just hear the good news that like the current political situation that's going on there. It's sometimes it's going to be out of their control. Sometimes they can't do anything about it. And I want to just, let everyone know to pray for Myanmar, and just uplift Myanmar people in prayer, and just help them in any way that they can. Prayer is, of course, the most important thing, but there are other things that you can do as well.
But let me go back. So if somebody wants to minister there, what are the challenges to do ministry in Myanmar right now?
Challenges are that a long time ago, not today, but long time ago, on our on our IDs, we would typically have, which religion you're associated with. And I remember my parents always talking about it when I was younger. If you carry the badge of Christian on your ID, sometimes you weren't giving the most or the bestest opportunities in work or anywhere else. And so the challenges of ministering in Myanmar is, one, because it's just it's a small country, 54 million, but that's certainly not a lot of people. It's just being able to reach out to the community. There's this a stigma of Christianity equals bad or something like that, because it's mostly Buddhist country, and so it's hard sometimes. As humble as they are, they'll listen to you and they'll give you the time of the day. But the challenge in itself is their mindsets are the way they live their life is, they do good things now so that they can enjoy it in their next life. And that's how they operate, really. And even when we try to minister to a lot of them, a lot of them are maybe not so receptive because, hey, I'm not a bad person. I know you're telling me about Jesus. I'm not a bad person. I don't do bad things. This is what I believe, and this is what I grew up on, and this is what I believe. And so sometimes, yes, those challenges are there just because of the stigma of Christians and everything else that comes along with it.
So I know that a couple of young people from your church have been very active in advocacy for the people of Myanmar since the coup, especially. If someone would like to get involved with that, how can they get started? What do they need to do?
Yeah. it's actually those two who connected me to your ministry. So shout out to Terrence and Jen from our church. They lead a few organizations and help lead a few organizations. And you can reach out to them on social media. So one is at GM4MD, the number 4. And the other one is at USACM3. And they are leading the efforts in advocating about what's going on, advocating about what you can do and how you can get involved. And one of those things that they do is there is currently a bill called the Burma bill, which I think the long form is to protect democracy in Burma. And so they are holding these Zoom trainings. If you didn't know about how to call into your state's representative's or senator's office to getting on board to sign the bill, to approve it, to help the people of Myanmar, they're holding those sessions. They also have a lot of partnerships with other organizations and how you can get involved, whether if it's financially, whether if it's through advocating on their behalf, or whether if it's getting involved in any of the protests or any of the social media campaigns. They have a lot of those things going on. So do check them out. Again, GM4MD and USACM3.
Peter, if listeners wants to get in touch with you, what are the easiest ways?
Yes, you can reach out to me on my Facebook, Peter Lwin, just one word, LWIN. Feel free to reach out to me, send me a message, and I'll be honored to get to know you. Yep.
Yeah, we'll put that link in the episode descriptions as well. So as we are getting ready to wrap it up, tell me quickly about your family, which is so important to know you, and it just humanizes us. So very quickly, tell me a little bit about your family.
Sure. Joined into the ministry with my wife, Michelle, and I have 2 sons. First, my older son's name is Seth, and younger son's name is Silas. So they're 3 and 1. And it's just, man, doing ministry before kids, totally different. Doing ministry with kids, totally different.
Totally understand that.
Totally
understand that.
So I'm getting to really enjoy, I guess, the fruits, the gifts of children from God, and it's just been a great season in my life. And ministering to my wife and my kids has been fun. There are not without challenges, but I think those challenges really helps me grow in my ministry with others as well. There's a quote that I heard the other day, which went something like, in our peaks, in our highest moments, God inspires us. In our valleys, God matures us. So I think that's so good. And those with kids will attest that sometimes we feel like we're in the valleys.
And I would say when I have 4 children, 5, 3, and my twins are 1.5 years. So when it comes to children, I think they should be our strength rather than our weakness. Because of my children, I see God differently, the way he reacts to me. I learn from my experience that, he is really merciful. He's really kind. He is sweet. So it teaches me so much. So I agree with you, man. So
absolutely.
Finally, the last question is super difficult one. I think you should think about that. And I do this with other guests too. So, and that is, do you know any good jokes? Because I like you to tell me a joke to lighten the mood.
Yeah. I came across something the other day, and I thought I literally almost fell off my chair. It's one of those jokes where you have to listen all the way to the end, and I saved it on my phone. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read it real quick. So here it is. So a Minneapolis couple decided to go to Florida to thaw out during a particularly icy winter. They planned to stay at the same hotel where they spent their honeymoon 20 years earlier. Because of their hectic schedules, it was difficult for the couple to coordinate their travel plans. So the husband left Minnesota and flew to Florida on Thursday, while his wife planned to fly down the following day. The husband checked into the hotel. There was a computer in his room, so he decided to send an email to his wife. However, he accidentally left out one letter of her email address and sent the email without realizing his error. Meanwhile, somewhere in Houston, a widow had just returned home from her husband's funeral. He was a Baptist minister who was called home to glory following a heart attack. Now, the widow decided to check her email, expecting condolence messages from family and friends. But after reading her very first email, she screamed and fainted. The widow's son rushed into the room, found his mother on the floor, and saw the computer screen, which read, "To my loving wife. Subject, I've just arrived today. I know you're surprised to hear from me. They have computers here now, and you are allowed to send emails to your loved ones. Since I've just arrived, I thought I would send you an email. Everything has been prepared for your arrival tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you then. Hope your journey is as uneventful as mine was. P.S. Sure is hot down here."
Oh, man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a good icebreaker. Good job, man. That's good. Very good.
Yeah.
Fantastic. That's good. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah.
Again, that was Peter Lwin of Calvary Burmese Church, Washington, D.C. And thank you to all our listeners. If you appreciate this podcast, please be sure to subscribe to the show and leave an honest review wherever you listen to your podcast.
You've been listening to Our Urban Voices with Dr. Alphonse Javed, which presents Christian narratives through diverse voices that impact urban ministry. Please check back for new episodes every week.